Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Dad Edge podcast. I'm Larry Hagner, your host and founder of this show, podcast, and movement. Got a great interview for you guys today from a gentleman who actually wrote the book on rookie fatherhood. Yes, for all you new dads out there, this show is for you, and all you guys who are veteran dads, guess what? This one's for you too. So I think we can all agree that we're all rookie fathers. All of us are rookie fathers. In other words, my 15-year-old and I just had this conversation not too terribly long ago. And he's like, what's it like being a dad? I was like, well, you know what it's like being, you have the first day of school. He's like, oh yeah. It's like, I was like, what does it feel like? He's like, it feels kind of uncertain. It feels like I'm not really sure where all my classes are at. I don't know what my teachers are going to be like. I don't know what the classes are necessarily going to be like, the subjects, like I'm taking algebra for the first time. I've never done that. I'm like, okay. I was like, well, great. That's what's being a dad is mostly like. I was like, think about it. I was like, right now you're 15 years old in 3 months, and today is my first day raising a 15-year-old in 3 months. And tomorrow will be my first day raising a 15-year-old in 91 days. Every day is new, and we can feel like a rookie father at all times. And we're never too late to learn new skills. And that's why I'm excited today to have a conversation with Kendall Smith, who has wrote the best-selling book, Rookie Father. It's dedicated for men experiencing fatherhood for the first time who may not have had fathers themselves growing up. It also provides a succinct advice and is actionable across a range of topics that can relate to being a great parent, husband, father, role model, the whole 9 yards. The mission of this book is to provide a stronger foundation for not only this generation of fathers, but for the next generation. And I say this all the time, guys, but one thing that has been very, very clear and on my mind and heart lately is I love the fact that men come in, do life with us in our community or in some way, shape, or form because they're eager and hungry to learn new things. And what I always tell men is that this doesn't stop with you. Whether you pick up a book like Rookie Father or you do something to improve your learning, this is not just about you. It doesn't start, stop, and end with you. These are actually legacy moves that you're doing in your life and fatherhood and marriage, the whole 9 yards, because the things that you are learning and implementing, you're setting your kids up for success, and then your kids' kids. These are legacy things. So take these learnings very, very seriously. Take this podcast very, very seriously. Any book that you pick up, or a mentor or a counselor or a coach or anybody that you hire, take that stuff very, very seriously because it doesn't stop with you. So who's Kendall Smith? He lives in New Jersey. He's been married for 17 years. He has an 8-year-old son named Connor. He works by day in the digital industry and in the mornings as an author. It's kind of like Clark Kent and Superman, if you ask me. His literary work covers a range of subject matters, including thrillers, and he dabbles in even political satire. But his backstory is that his parents were separated when he was 6 years old, and they were divorced by the time he was 9. And since he was a kid, he knew he wanted to be a good father. So that's why he has written the book. And the book is actually 131 chapters. Now, before you fall out of your chair or, fly off the road, if you're listening to this in the car, these are 1 to 2 page chapters. They're very digestible. They're perfect for guys. But what we're going to be talking about today is being a role model. How your upbringing doesn't have to necessarily define who you are and how you parent. We're also going to be going over marriage and just making sure that your marriage and you and your wife are on point and working as a team. And most importantly, as well, we're going to be talking about legacy, which, as you guys know, if you listen to the show for any amount of time, legacy is something that we talk about all the time. That's why we say live legendary, legacy is forever. So, Kendall, good to have you on Dad Edge, my friend. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thanks, Larry. Great to be here. Appreciate being on your show.
Yeah, man. So let's go back to Kendall at 6 years old. Were you an only child?
Only child.
Wow.
So yeah, it was, it's funny. I really didn't understand what was happening when my parents were separating until the moment my father was at the door and there was a cab by the curb. And I didn't comprehend. It was the most emotional moment in my life. And still coming to grips with it to some extent years later. But As you probably know, there's redemption when you're an engaged and involved father and you're married 17 years and you're making it work. It's the only word that comes to mind is redemption. And there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah. So, well, real quick, just for clarification, do you still have a relationship with your father?
Yeah, he passed away in 2012, the year before my son was born.
Wow. Okay. Did you have a relationship with him growing up?
So yeah, when we were growing up, he lived down in Florida. I was in Jersey. And I would get on the plane to fly down solo, which you could still do, but that was not a common thing back in the day. So I fly down, I spend 1 or 2 weeks with him, fly back. That relationship frayed. He remarried, had 2 children with my stepmother. And then at that point, he basically opted and cut us off from child support. And my mom was at her wit's end. And it was like, I grew up with a little anxiety when it comes to money. And it stems from seeing my mom struggle and figuring out like, how is she going to pay the mortgage? What is she going to do? And then sadly, we connected, my father and I, when I was 17, briefly over Thanksgiving for a couple hours. And then since then it became estranged and we were never able to heal the relationship. And on one hand, I regret it. On the other, I feel like I made the right decision, which is hard to say, but it's the truth.
Man, so what was that like for you at that age?
Oh, I mean, I grew up so bitter and so frustrated and so annoyed that I had to go through this when I had my friends with their dads. And the kids like me, who, again, this was late 70s and 80s, families were splitting apart left and right. The divorce rate exploded. And there were other kids like me in our community that they had different responses. Some of them, their parents remarried. Some of them took on so much of a burden of being the man around the house. I had one friend at 13 years old who was painting the exterior of his mother's house and didn't end up well in terms of where he was mentally and emotionally. And at a young age, I promised myself, I said, I'm not doing this to my kids. There's no way I'm doing this. Like, I started absorbing and looking for lessons from other fathers and other role models in my community, so I could start building a somewhat of a foundation for when I start to parent.
So, okay. So I can really relate to your story as far as, being raised by a mother and, no child support coming in, and your mom is just, you see that impact of complete and total financial uncertainty.
Yeah.
Right. Which doesn't make you feel very safe as a kid. And, so growing up for you, if you could encapsulate like what your upbringing was like, was there any father figures in your life?
Well, when I did some self-reflection, my grandmother was one of my number one role models, and my mother. And then the other dads, there were certain aspects that when I was growing up, I would notice a certain level of patience or just involvement that I was like, oh, I like this. I like what this guy's doing. And there's other dads, I'm like, I want nothing to do with them. Like, there were just certain people. And what I write about in the book and what I recommend is doing a lot of soul searching and finding those sources of inspiration. And I tell readers, look for it anywhere. I don't care if it's a TV character you loved, like whatever inspires you to be a great dad, embrace that. And if there's people in your life that pass along values to you, you appreciate, go back and find them, you talk to them, have a conversation, include them into your web of mentors per se. And it'll give you a sounder foundation for you to kind of grapple with the fact you're responsible for the life of another human being. And if you want to do right by them, you've got to get your head in a good place for that.
So it sounds like what you did is you looked for maybe the diamonds in the rough sometimes. Mm-hmm. Not maybe all the time, depending on who is around. I can definitely relate to that as well. So I'm like, wow, man, this guy's got this guy's got nothing, man. But what were some of the key learnings that maybe positively impacted you as you grew up?
I'll tell you, the Boy Scouts. I learned a lot about personal responsibility. They were probably one of the biggest outlets. And my mother, to her credit, I wanted to quit the Scouts. She's like, nope, you're going to stick with this. You're going to go for 2 weeks camping upstate in New York, schlepping through mud and rain and sun, and you're going to be a Boy Scout in thick and thin. And I stuck with it, and I have no regrets doing it because it exposed me to men weekends away with our dad's friends, with our troop leaders. And despite some of the scandals that have come out of the Scouts, I give them a lot of credit. And my mom was definitely a source of personal responsibility. Like the deal was like, hey, you want a new bike? Go deliver some papers. Go shovel some sidewalks. The bank of mother is closed temporarily until we can get a little more on our feet. So I had that happen. But other people, teachers had a lot of influence on me. I was the youngest in the class, so I credit some teachers, and I credit them in the book as inspiring me to write and just to really pursue academics a little more seriously. I was an underachiever, so teachers had a major influence on me.
So, how so? Tell me about that.
I realized a history teacher at Midland Park High School, Larry Sailing, who has since passed, unfortunately, that I had a lot more intellectual capabilities than I gave myself credit for. And I really started pursuing my passions, and I went into science and a bit into math. But I really started to find myself junior, senior year. And the teachers I had there encouraged free thought, thinking for yourself, getting the news. I took a class by Terry Soyi, a phenomenal teacher in Midland Park High School, who we studied the New York Times every day. It was current world affairs, and we got into that. It just turned my head around so that I went from being a C student to a B+ student by the time I started to apply to college.
Interesting. So, did you know you were going to write later on down the road, being a free thinker?
I had my grade school teachers in 8th grade say, look, I did a ton of writing projects at the time. And they were like, Kendall, you got something here, like keep going. And one of them, her name was Mrs. Stenwall, gave me a hardcover book that had blank pages, and it was all about writing your own story. And she inscribed it saying, you're going to be published one day. So I went back, I tracked her down about when I published my first thriller and just thanked her. And she was very appreciative. And I think she'll like Rookie Father too. That's the pivot I've made to this new book, this new genres. It's been rewarding, and I give her a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, and I want to get to your book here in a minute because I'm really curious. I'm going to ask you a question, but let's put it on the shelf for you not to answer it right now.
Okay.
But I'm very, very curious about it. So, Rookie Father, I can relate to your book. I wish I would have had your book, like when I first became a father, because I was desperately looking for, different resources, very simple resources of like, hey, how do I navigate this, man? I'm completely clueless. I think if you grew up like you and I did, where it's sort of a fatherless environment, then you had like maybe a turntable, like a lazy Susan of like dad figures who come in and out, as the situation sees fit. But with you growing up the way you did, was this book more for you? And again, I don't want you to answer right now, but was this book more for you to basically solidify, hey, these are some of the learnings that I've learned, like to where you wrote the book as if you were maybe advising yourself years ago? Or was this like, man, I know what it feels like to be lost, and I don't want another man to feel this way? And wherever you go on that answer, I'm curious. But before we do that, I want to talk about marriage real quick and then get into your book. But
Sure.
how you've been married now for 17 years?
Yeah, 17.
Yeah. So, your book is about fatherhood, but a big part of fatherhood is marriage. A lot of people don't tell us that. And what have you learned in 17 years of marriage?
I would say that if you go in to marriage blinded by love or faith, you are going to run into good times and bad times. And the bad times is when your marriage gets tested. And we got tested. Every marriage does. The first year of your child's life, when you're a first-time parent, that's one of the hardest years to get through. It's just mind-numbing. You're not sleeping. You have to divide in different chores because your wife can't do it all unless you're a 50s dad. And if you are, I just don't know how you can function in this environment with so much to do and accomplish and work and whatnot. But I've also learned that, to answer your question, that it's the most important team you can be on. No matter what you think about it, if you and your partner are in lockstep in how you parent, your parenting philosophy, what values you want to pass along. And if you're kind of a united front and you communicate openly, you can literally get through anything together. And I think that you have to realize, you're going to have tough times, even years after your kids are born. You're going to go through phases, and the more communicative you are in expressing how you feel, the further you're going to go in your marriage.
What are some, you talk about communication, and I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, and even in, one-on-one coaching, or when guys apply to our mastermind, when I ask guys about like, hey, what is it about, if I ask them like, what is it that has your attention? What do you want out of either this coaching, mentorship, community, whatever else? 8 out of 10 men will identify marriage as the point of contention, the point that and if I dive a little bit deeper on, well, give me a lay of the land on what's going on in the relationship, most of the time it boils down to communication. And when I ask the guys after they've identified like, hey, I just want to elevate, I want to have better communication with my wife, I was like, what does that look like? Well, I just want to be better, right? I want to be improved. I want to have more, right? So better, improved, and more. And I'm like, okay, well, how do you know you've gotten there? Once it's improved, how do you know it's improved? And they're like, well, we're able to talk about it. Sometimes they'll be like, well, we have more time to talk. I was like, well, what would you do with more time? Would it be effective, or would it just be more time? And then you'll start to be like, oh, I've never really thought of it like that. Or when I say, hey, better, what does better look like? And then they haven't even usually thought that far on their own. They'll be like, well, I want better to be able to talk about anything. I want to be able to talk about anything with her. And I'm like, okay, great. Well, now what you're talking about is creating an environment of psychological safety where both you feel and she feels judgment-free, worry-free, that you can bring up any topic, question, or idea without guilt, shame, blame, or pain. Do you know how to do that? And they're like, I have no idea how to do that. Okay. So that's why I think it's so important for men to identify, yes, we all want better communication. Yes, we all want more communication. We want it to be improved, but we don't really know, I don't think, for the most part, what those guardrails look like, what that skill looks like. But for you, when you talk about communication in marriage, what are some things in 17 years that you've really seen have changed the game for communication with you guys?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a key thing for guys to understand is that when you're able to communicate your feelings and it's direct and it's not confrontational, it gives your wife something to react to. That's not anger, that's not fear, that's not frustration, that's not yelling. And those are all kind of the side effects of not being able to how to really communicate how you feel. So one tip that I learned from my mother, she got her master's in counseling work. And she shared with me a concept called empathetic communication. And this is, I can't say it saved my marriage, but it just accelerates the connection you have with your wife if you can do it properly. And it's basically stating, what your wife's doing, how it's making you feel, and responding about and discussing like how that's not the outcome you were hoping for. So it's like, honey, you're telling me to do the kitchen dishes, but I feel like I'm letting you down because I'm outside shoveling snow, and that's a higher priority right now. So how can we work through this? And as soon as you angle the frustration on that feeling, women will respond to it much more differently than if it's anger. You call her a derogatory name, something happens. It doesn't feel masculine at first when you do it, but when you do it a couple times and you see the response you get right to the heart of the matter, and you actually save time, I think, in terms of how you communicate with your spouse.
Why do you think so many of us are afraid to communicate what we feel?
Because society tells men to shut their feelings away and not really get involved in it. And for me, and you may feel this way, Larry, we don't have the luxury of or the time or inclination to kind of hide, those feelings away, because we've seen what it does to us personally when we do. I'm speaking on behalf of you, so forgive me, but I have learned early on that the quicker you can communicate and the more frequently that you do, you level set the playing field per se. It's a much more honest conversation. And I grew up with a lot of dishonesty in my family life, with my father letting us down and whatnot. And that's not what I wanted to provide for my son when he grew up.
That makes a lot of sense. I honestly think so. You tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I feel really, really good about this particular analysis of how most men operate, not only because I've seen it, but because I used to be it. And not to mention the fact that there's still this part of me that wants to do some of these poor behaviors. And that is, yeah, exactly. That's like, well, you could be saying like, man, I feel kind of hurt over this, or I feel rejected over this, or I feel angry about this. Right. And my first thought, even after doing this work now since 2011, is to be like, don't feel that way. Don't be a wuss about it. Don't be negative. Right. I'm sitting there like, and I think there is a way that you can be kind of a wuss about it, quote unquote, or negative about it. And that is if you then get quietly resentful or passively resentful, right? Or like, oh, well, I'm angry. So I'm just going to show her that I'm angry by not telling her, but I'm just going to show her like in sort of maybe passive aggressive moves. Maybe I'll be short with her. Maybe I won't be as affectionate with her. Maybe I'll do this or whatever. Give her a text of like a 1-word answer. Maybe she'll ask me what's wrong. When she does ask me what's wrong, I'll just say, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. I'm good. Right. And then we backpedal even more. And I think a lot of us was like, well, if I say that out loud, am I being negative? Am I being a strain on her? Am I being a strain on myself? Should I just man up? Should I just grow a set of balls? Like that kind of thing. The other thing too, though, is a lot of us view it as like, well, if I do share with, if I share with her what I'm feeling, I feel sort of weak. I feel like this negative feminine energy, like I'm oozing, like I'm gross, like, oh, like, yeah, I'm angry or I'm hurt. Like we kind of view it as that. And that's really unfortunate because you can actually share where you're at from an emotional standpoint in a very masculine, empowering, not overpowering, empowering way. Like I've learned that if I go to my wife and she's like, hey, are you okay? And before I'd be like, yeah, I'm fine. Just
Yep.
stay over there. I'm fine. Don't worry about it. Now I'm like, I'm really not. And she's like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, I'm actually, I'm angry a little bit. I was like, if I'm being honest. And well, what about? Well, this morning when we got out of bed and I didn't hear what you said, and I said, hey, what did you say? And you snapped at me. I got kind of pissed because, to be honest, like when you were talking to me, I was yawning. I didn't hear you. And then when you snapped at me the way you did, the tone of your voice really didn't sound like how we operate within our marriage. And to be honest, I was kind of turned off by it. That was an actual conversation my wife and I had yesterday morning.
It's a very healthy approach.
It is. I mean, just being like,
Yeah.
hey, like, I'm not going to resent you. And it's basically like, hey, this is where I'm at, but I'm also willing to talk about it. So it wasn't like my finger was in her face, be like, you do not do that. Or like, I was pissed off at you. Or like, I'm just like, yeah, this is where I'm at. She's like, oh, she's like, I'm really sorry. She goes, I really didn't realize that. And I was half asleep myself. And I'm like, it's okay. It's all right. She's like, but I'm really sorry about that. And then, okay, cool. Done. Over with. That could have been something back in my old days of marriage would have ruined the whole day. Cause I just would have been like quietly kind of resentful. I'm not going to feel these feelings and I'm not going to tell her about it. I'm just going to let her know by my actions, which is ridiculous. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So I like how you do that. What are some other things you've learned
about marriage?
Yeah.
I think it's important. It's so important that really after that first year, I tell new dads, like, look, consider your first year a sabbatical. You're not going to go out with your boys on the weekends. Like once in a while is fine. But if you're like an avid triathlete or you write novels, I didn't write a novel when my child was born. I took time off from that. But after that first year, it's not only important to get back to your interests, but it's important to get back and do the things that you and your wife love to do. And I say, like, date your wife 2 or 3 times a month, get a babysitter, child's a year old. I'm sure you have a relative or a friend that could look after a couple hours. You don't spend a ton of money, just spend time together where you're not full-time parents. Like you just be yourself. And it's actually a tip I got just casually watching Dr. Phil one day. And it was like, again, like this is what I've been doing since I was like 9 years old, a little thing like will stick in my head, like, it's great advice. I love that. And this truth, like when you have time with you and your wife just to do whatever you want and you get back to your why you married her in the first place, and you can celebrate that a little bit. And it's got to be ongoing, and it's something to look forward to, because with all the things you have to do in life, you have this Saturday night I've got 4 hours with my wife to go see a movie and a dinner or whatever it might be, catch a show. it's having those things that you can look forward to in tandem with your wife, alone with your wife, is a blessing.
Agreed, my man. Agreed. All right. Well, let's move on to the book, which I think will. And what's your son's name?
Connor.
Connor. That's right. And I think this will encapsulate obviously 10 years. He's 10.
He's 8 years old.
8 years old. Okay, so eight years of fatherhood. I want to go back to that original question that I asked you about maybe the reasons of writing the book.
So it came to me when I was, again, a year after being a dad, and thinking to myself at that point, okay, our marriage is in a good place. We're in the house we want to be in. My son's happy. I'm spending quality time every day with him. He's smiling, engaging with me at that point at 1 year old. And I sat down after finishing my third novel and was like, like I got to change things up. And I actually watched a video that Ricky Gervais did back years ago.
Yeah.
It's on YouTube. And he talks about whatever you do, write what you know. And that hit me like, you know what? I know what it's like to grow up without a father and then become one. I know there's millions of guys out there like me. Why don't I focus on a book that almost takes me out of the equation and writes this purely for the reader so they can act on it in their own manner and whatever's, however they're most comfortable with, and write it for that new dad and his challenge of becoming a dad for the first time, and offer a resource for guys that can get into the content that's actionable quick, and the chapters are short, so you're not going to be struggling to find or get to the point of the article or the chapter rather.
Yeah. So did you know you were going to be writing a 131 chapter book?
Yeah, I think it landed exactly where I wanted it to. I brainstormed. I sat down for a couple mornings and just brainstormed what are the single pieces of advice I got from a young age all the way through. And as I jotted every single one of them down, I got to about 50. And then I kind of compartmentalized them into different sections. And then I wanted to go deeper. I found areas like the section, the legacy, your legacy in the book, like all the little things I did about, and things you can do as a father to really set a foundation for your legacy, and what do you want to leave behind, and goals to set for. So I kind of explored here and there a little further and further, and then eventually kind of landed around, I think I was at 125, and I'm like, I need like 5 more chapters to get to make it a little bigger, a little broader. And I got there, but it's really purely written for that person like myself who doesn't want to hold back when fatherhood comes around.
Doesn't want to hold back when fatherhood comes around. I like that. I like that a lot. I know some of the things that we really talked about, which I think we've kind of already talked about a little bit, but let's speak to the men who didn't necessarily have a good solid foundation of fatherhood growing up. I would say that these guys are probably the ones, and if I'm putting, I'm not trying to put all men into a box, right? But I would say, I think it's safe to say that most guys, especially guys who have had a pretty poor upbringing, if you get to the heart and soul of that man, being a good father and being what we call the pattern breakers is really, really important to them, whether they say it out loud or not. And what I mean by saying it out loud or not is like some men, depending on their journey, they are of the belief that my fatherhood journey is going to be the same as mine growing up. I don't know. I want to break the pattern. I just don't know how. And it seems like a really big task to figure that out. So I'm just going to do what I know. Then you have other guys that draw a line in the sand and they're like, nope, this is not going to be me. This is not going to be how I'm going to live. And I'm going to do everything that I possibly can to make sure that it doesn't. So let's talk to the men who are in that camp who don't have a good foundation growing up. Where do those guys even start?
Well, I'll even back up further. And I did research for this book. And when you look at the US Census data, there's 19 million men that are in or entering the stage of parenthood that were raised in the 90s that didn't have a father themselves.
19 million?
19 million men.
Wow, man. I've never heard that stat. Okay.
It's mind blowing. And the other things and the rationale for the encouragement that I would give to new dads to really focus on being a pattern breaker is strictly that when you're not raised without a dad, and when you start to find the resources and you start to get feedback and you start asking for advice and you start opening yourself up to ideas, you're almost forced to when you don't have that playbook from your dad. And it's so critical that if you can get that foundation for yourself and just approach it with confidence and honesty, like it's the most redeeming thing I think I've ever done with my life. I mean, just to be a dad and like see the smile on my son's face when we're goofing around with each other, having a good time, and like knowing that I never had that, but he'll never have any of that baggage that I had growing up. And that's what motivates you. And again, when you get like 5-10 years down the road in this and you're maintaining it, even if you're not perfect, if you keep just tweaking your game and your approach with your parenting philosophy, and you're going to see the fruits of your labor. You're going to see just a happy, loving child that grew up in a normal home. And it's the most rewarding thing I think a person can do.
What are some things that you started doing early on with Connor that started planting seeds of, hey, this is breaking the pattern. This is breaking the pattern. This is the way I'm going to operate?
Well, the first one was just every day spending time, like quality time with him. Coming home, and I remember that the first year, again, it's like trench warfare with your wife. Like you're getting in there and taking over the machine gun of the baby and walking in the front door. And I swoop up Connor, my son, and feed him, play with him, bathe him, just giving my wife a break, who was a stay-at-home mom. And that quality time, the bond, one thing they never tell you is it takes 3 or 4 months, in my opinion, at least what my experience was, for your child, your infant, to really kind of acknowledge you and like get engaged with you. And the first time he smiled toward me when he was in his crib, it was like it was mind blowing. It was just like, here we go. Like, here's what all this work's been leading up to. So I learned about just every day spending quality time. So that begged the question, my work life, what controls can I put in place to ensure I'm there for him every single day? And the other thing I learned was sharing my passions with my son. So we cook together all the time. I'm a big advocate for being a dad cook. There's nothing more rewarding. And teaching your son the tricks of the trades. He got into drumming. I'm a drummer in a cover band in New Jersey. And he got into the drums, and he's got a guitar, and I got a guitar back there too. I dabble. So he's getting into music now. And so I'm not forcing my interest on him, but I'm letting his interest kind of organically grow. And if we share that, fantastic.
That is so cool, man. So it sounds like what you really like to do is live life, but take Connor along with you.
Yeah, I think so. And then if he ends up in a sport, like I grew up playing soccer, and he's nuts about football. So I coached his football team. I got involved, even though I didn't play in college, and I'm standing next to guys who were like semi-trucks. They're like 6'2", former linemen of like Penn State. I'm like, hi, how are you? Like, I'm one of the new coaches here that's going to help out with the kids. And then I'm a student of the game again, trying to learn how to teach these kids to play football properly and just being involved. And when you do that, like there's so much reward in that as a father.
I love that, man. I have a quick funny story that I think might make you smile. So Connor's 8, right? You said Mason, my 14-year-old, he was 8 when he first started playing football. And up to that point, he played baseball and wrestling. And I was his coach for both of those. And I loved it. Those were the 2 sports I grew up on, 2 sports I knew. Never played football. Always wanted to try it, just never did. And when he first got involved with football, I was like, oh, cool. I was like, well, that's awesome, man. I was like, I'm not going to coach that. I was like, I know nothing about that. I was like, so it's going to be kind of cool being a spectator again. And I show up to practice, the very first practice. The head coach comes up to me and he's like, hey, man. He goes, are you Mason's dad? I said, yeah. He goes, well, I need an extra set of hands this season coaching football. And I smiled and I was like, and I'm your guy. And he goes, you look like you played the game. I was like, I am not your guy. I was like, I know nothing about, I was like, I know enough about football. I watched it on TV, coaching it. Yeah, dude, I'm not your guy. And he's like, oh, come on, man. It can't be that bad. And I'm like, no, it's really that bad. I was like, I can hold a pad and I can do whatever you want me to do, but I can't I know nothing about plays. I know hardly anything about penalties, and I don't know strategy behind football. And so he started barking out these. I think he thought I was joking. He started barking out these orders like, all right, guys, we're going to run a jet sweep. He's like, Hagner, I need you to do that. I was like, I have no idea what a jet sweep is, dude. No clue. So it became like this running joke for the entire season that Coach Hagner had no clue what the heck he was doing. And the best course of action I could tell these boys was run faster and be aggressive. Like that was the running joke. And one time me and Mason went out to Jimmy John's for dinner after our practice. It's about halfway through the season. It's a really cool moment he and I had that's right in line with what you're talking about. We were talking about football and practice and all this stuff. And he goes, hey, Dad, he goes, can I ask you something? And I was like, of course. And he goes, I feel like I'm going to make you angry. I was like, angry? What do you mean? He's like, well, I'm going to say something and I just don't want you to feel bad. And I'm like, not going to make me feel bad. And he goes, do you have any idea what you're doing out there? Right. And I go, you want to know? You want to know a secret? And he goes, yeah. And I go, you really want to know? I was like, come here. Yeah. And I go, I have no idea what I'm doing. I was like, all those plays? I know nothing about those plays. This, and this, nothing. This and that, nothing. I was like, I'm learning this game just like you are. And I was like, and here's the cool thing. I could care less. I was like, I'm out there to be with you and to learn with you. I was like, this just goes to show we are never too old to learn something new. And I just love learning this game with you. And from that moment on, it was just a really cool rest of the season. I stepped away in the following season, but it was just a really cool moment, just teaching your kid like, hey, yeah, I don't have all the answers. Let's go find out together.
Yeah, it's fun to learn a new sport and get involved and just being there. And then also we had moved town. So we were literally not even a week in our new house in the new town. And then we had the football team start up and we jumped on that team, and it was a great way to get introduced to the town. And it's not learning a new sport is just, it opens your mind up to competing differently in your own work life, which I kind of like. Yeah. And it's kind of exciting.
I agree. I know we've talked about role models. We've talked about, your foundation being a pattern breaker. Legacy is another big one as well. What is it about legacy and fatherhood that we need to know more about, or what are some things that you've learned?
I've learned, and what I advocate is that when you are successful in your marriage and you are raising kids and they're healthy and they're well balanced and like you're doing everything you can to help your family get ahead, that's a noble pursuit. And a lot of men shrugged from that when I was growing up. And it was a confusing time. We won't get into all the details about where the divorce trend started from, and that's a whole can of worms. But just establishing yourself as someone that's going to make a difference in your family's lineage. I kind of call it like when you look at your grandparents straight down to your grandkids, anyone who's had parents and witnessed their divorce and the demise of their marriage, there's kind of a schism in that straight line of your lineage, and you're there to straighten it out. And if you can do that, no matter where you end up netting out, if you end up poor, rich, I don't care where you net out, but if you have given everything you can for your kids, you can leave this world knowing you did something and accomplished something meaningful. And you righted the wrong, essentially, in your own family history.
Yeah. Yeah. What about, what are your views on, Connor's 8? What are your views on rites of passages for boys?
Well, I think it comes down to, will they implement personal responsibility when they go through that rite of passage? It's a little bit kind of ahead of where I am with raising my son, but that rite of passage, I think it's conveying how important it is to be a good father when you become one. Make sure you become a father when you want to become one, ideally when you're in love with someone and you're married. And if not, that's fine, but you're going to have to commit and step up if you become a father. And then lastly, those rites of passage, if you entrust your son to use good personal judgment and take personal responsibility, they're going to net out better than if they try to find something else to blame. And if they're in a situation where their friends in a car are driving them and they've been drinking or smoking weed, and they hit the pause button, they take an Uber, or they call me when they're 16 years old if it happens, and like do the smart thing and use your head. That rite of passage will kind of build on itself, I think, in your child's mind about how important it is to be a responsible adult.
Yeah, I like that, man. What are some other things that, as your book has been out, that people keep coming back to the same themes in your book that were most meaningful?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One that keeps coming up, and people talk about this, and I've been approached by it, and it's only been out for about a week and a half, so the feedback's still coming in. But I point out for kids that were raised in divorced homes, a great thing you have to set yourself up for success psychologically. So one thing I tell and ask new dads ask themselves is look at your parents' marriage. How many years did that exist? And find an honest answer. Was it when they separated? Were they never married? How long were they together? And figure out a time frame. And my parents were essentially together for about 9 years. And what I tell dads is when you are committed to a woman and you're married, when you are married for 9 years, from that day forward, you can consider yourself a success because your marriage has outlasted how long your parents did. And that's meaningful. Yeah, we're going to have my wife and I have known each other and started dating. We've been dating for 20 years this coming May. So that to me is like,
Congratulations.
yeah, no, thank you. It's just a great feeling because, and I've talked to my mom. My mom passed away sadly from cancer about 4 years ago. And I said, you never gave me credit for having a relationship that lasted as long as it has, and it's still strong and it's so wonderful. And I don't think she could really comprehend that because I was almost that kind of philosophy, like, it would have been nice to have been like congratulated and saying, hey, you did better than your father and I did. And you've done something right. And I think every dad deserves to give themselves that credit, that they keep their marriage intact and that they're still in love and they're still united. It's a big thing.
Speaking of marriage, you have chapters in your book under part 2, which is your wife. So just so you guys know, part 1 is setting your foundation. Part 2 is your wife. Part 3 is your child. Part 4 is guest interview. Part 5, safety structure. Part 6 is your work. Part 8 is your finances. I want to go to this topic under part 2, which is your wife. And you have chapter 26, which is a heavy subject. What's a heavy subject?
The subject is you confronting or addressing the issue of your wife's baby weight. And if you have the desire and you think it's the right thing for her to lose that weight, not to encourage her to do it herself, and for you to get involved. And that's taking care of yourself.
Awesome.
And I think, and that's every dad after, that first year of managing an infant, you're not in shape, you're not taking great care of yourself. There's a lot more you could be doing. And even just looking at the nightly menu for dinners, like what can we do and tweak that's healthier, that's going to get us back in shape? And just never put that out there to your wife that the baby weight needs to be addressed without you leaning in yourself to get involved and help do it yourself.
Okay. What about the good weekend? That's chapter 33, the good weekend.
So the good weekend is when you're there on Sunday night in bed with your wife, the kid's happy. Maybe you had a relative visit and it was a wonderful visit. Maybe it's just you communicated better. You got along better. You kind of got through the blocking and tackling of parenting, and state to your wife how much of a wonderful weekend you have with her, and just let her know how you feel about how well things are going, and just to share that little bit of that personal news or that personal emotion of feeling that way, because you don't hear that a lot in the first year of your child's life. It's so quick, and you're so tired from lack of sleep. You have a great weekend, you have to say it, and it helps.
I like that. I call that acknowledgement and appreciation. Mm-hmm. My wife and I, we bookend meetings with that. What do you want to acknowledge and appreciate, over the past 7 days, right? What do we want to acknowledge and appreciate about the right now? Things like that I think are really, really powerful. Chapter 35 is the man of the house. You have man in quotes. Tell me about that.
So the man of the house is not someone who comes home, kicks off their shoes, and sits down and asks for his dinner.
Wait, what? So I've been doing it wrong for 15 years. Like I thought that was my
Yes.
role, man. Come on.
If it is, then your wife's a saint for sticking with you.
Right.
But those days are over, dude. You got to get involved. And when I say man of the house, is you have to divide and conquer the chores and the responsibilities when you become parents. And when you do, find the things you love. And most importantly, if you can take and alleviate your wife from doing a certain number of chores and give her free time, that makes you more of the house. You're taking ownership of taking care of things. And if you love to clean, then you do the cleaning and she cooks. You divide and conquer. And it's a much more involved process now if you want a successful parent, if you want to successfully parent, because that's what women's perceptions are today too.
Totally agreed. Totally agree. My wife and I are real big on team, like team effort. Hey, if you cook dinner, I clean up.
Yep.
I clean up.
Great.
You cook. You know, like it's yeah. Each of us know our role, which is really, really good. I know I'm kind of going through these because some of these chapters like just really, really stick out. Under part 3, your child. Um, it's the I just had it and it just hang on, where's it at? It's the overbearing parent on the sideline.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So I've witnessed it twice already, but promise yourself you're not going to be one of the screamers on the sideline, screaming at the refs at the top of your lungs. And when you see it happen, it almost ruins the sport. It's like, look, they're in whatever grade it might be. Like, just take a step back. And I also encourage dads, like, when and if you can coach, do it. Like, get involved. It's a great way to bond with your son and to expand that bond into other men and other families, for your daughter and other families. But yeah, just again, I don't cave in to feel like you have to scream to make yourself feel or your son feel like they're going to be a champion.
You know, I'm really glad you said that because I want to make sure if you are the parent of a youth athlete, shockingly, your efforts to quote unquote support your kid probably go the opposite direction from a psychological standpoint. If you are the loudest and craziest parent in the stands, I know that sounds counterintuitive. And guess what? With my 2 oldest boys, I made the same mistake. Was yelling from the stands, trying to support them, trying to coach, trying to, I want what's best for my boys, that kind of thing. Every single youth athlete person, or I'm sorry, expert who has come on the podcast has always said the exact same things. Your job is not to coach from the stands. Your job is to applaud when something happens. Screaming their name from the stands and doing this does nothing but add more and more pressure to their performance, which actually lowers their enjoyment of that sport. So if you guys are ever hard up for any type of resources around that, Mike Matheny's book, which is the Matheny Manifesto, really, really hits this home. No pun intended, Mike Matheny. But it really, really hits that point home that we could, and the other thing too, I'm sure you would agree, Kendall, like we call it, a lot of guys have come on the show and said the backseat lecture section, or the backseat lecture session after a game. Like a lot of guys grew up with like, oh my God, I just dreaded me being in the backseat of the car after my game with my dad because I just got railed, or he would give me advice and he thought he was being helpful, but it made me feel actually worse, and all those things. But yeah, I couldn't agree more with that chapter. And how do you go about supporting Connor?
Well, from what perspective? In sports or emotionally or everything, or what?
Yeah, emotionally when it comes to sports.
Well, one is I support him by coaching whenever I can. So I just signed up to help coach his local baseball team. Football, again, I've got to be a more of a student of the sport. We're going to be watching film this year, so I got to sort of understand what's going on, where people belong. So I'm going to study the game more. And I think also really assessing games after, it's more about getting in their head, about getting in your child's head. Like, hey, well, how'd you think about this performance or this and that? And I had one weekend where I was playing rec basketball. I was like, yeah, we killed that team 24-10. I'm like, okay, well, how do you think you played? He goes, oh, well, and he doesn't really want to answer that. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like, hey, is there a part of your game that you want to improve? Do you want to participate more in scoring or in defense or rebounding? And I think from there, you get on the court, go out and play with them. Like, get out and like give him some tips on the court, out and away from the team, so he's better prepared. So I think about baseball season coming up, and he has to play out because he's a young second grader. He's got to play with third and fourth graders. So now I'm thinking, okay, we got to get out there. We've got to get out and do some grounders and get like his hand-eye coordination a little more dialed in for baseball, because a third or fourth grader is going to eat him up. So I want him to be a little more prepared. So I think doing that in advance and just thinking ahead, and again, just being engaged and practicing with your kids. If you do it 2 or 3 times a week, they're going to be in so much better shape emotionally and probably for the game itself.
Agreed. Man, this is awesome. I think your book is so much needed out there in today's parenting world. What are some final advice tips you would like to give the guys as we close out?
I would say that the first thing is just to embrace fatherhood. Once you are baptized as a parent, there's no going back. So that be the best you can be, and open your mind to new ideas, and open yourself up for self-criticism that could lead to a much more richer environment for your children. I think that is so key. And once you're in the thick of it and you're a couple years down the road as a parent, and it's going a lot better for you than it was for your children, rather, compared to yourself growing up, you're already halfway there from winning the game, because you're making it a positive difference. Mm-hmm. And I guess the final thing is that if you can really focus on how you communicating, how you feel, you'll save so much time, energy, and frustration with your spouse if you could just learn some basic techniques that are explained in Rookie Father, the book, that it could really help you, I think, give yourself a better sense of give you more confidence in the long run.
Very cool, man. Well, we're going to have all of Kendall, all your links in the show notes, as well as a copy to your book. Where can men find you as far as from a website perspective, social media? If guys want more information, how do they best connect with you?
Yeah, a couple different ways. One is on Facebook and Instagram. The Rookie Father is the handle. Author Kendall on Twitter. Email address for me in this book is therookiefather@gmail.com. And then books available nationally at all major booksellers. And I'm encouraging guys to look for the book at local booksellers that need the help. Local book business owners have had a tough go of it. So if we can support our local bookstores, all the better.
Oh, I love that, man. Very, very cool. Well, guys, for all the show notes, you'll want to head over to thedadedge.com/Friday43 for this show. We'll have all of Kendall's links in there, his email address, as well as you can grab a copy of the book there as well. Kendall, thank you so much for coming on today, man. I wish your book was out 15 years ago. I could have really used it, because, man, I was looking for a guide like this. And as I was paging through your book, and especially a table of contents, I'm like, oh yeah, there's that. Oh, I wish I would have known that. Oh, I wish I would have had resources to that too. Very good stuff, man.
Thanks, Larry. Pleasure to be here.
You bet. Gentlemen, go out, live legendary. Take care.